Question: can Reiki heal trauma? Answer: it depends. Friends, welcome back to Heartscapes, where we are practicing the system of Reiki to be rooted, to be spacious, to be connected, and to remember ourselves. My name is Michaela. Welcome back to the studio. Really glad to have you here with me today. I wanted to get into this question because it's one that has circled around in many spaces that I'm in for quite some time. I've seen people ask this question in Reiki forums. It's come up in classes that I teach, and I've had clients ask me directly, can a Reiki session with you heal my trauma? And it's one that is a complex question with complex answers. And part of why I wanted to dig into it a little bit with you today is that too often I see this question answered in very simple and, in a sense, dualistic ways. Either, yes, Reiki can heal trauma, or no, Reiki cannot heal trauma. And what I've come to understand over years of working with the question of what does it mean to heal trauma generally, and then applying that specifically to the system of Reiki, is that there are many, many variables involved. It is not a simple yes or no answer. And so I wanted to dig into that a little bit today, knowing that it is too vast of a conversation to really definitively answer today. And in fact, I do not have a definitive answer to this question. What I have is a series of experiences and perspectives that have built over time across a wide range of different fields of interest and experience that I think could be helpful, at least to open up this conversation. To begin with, I wanted to just give you a little bit of context for my own relationship to this question, my own history with relation to this question. In other words, my relationship with working with trauma in general. And so I first really began to be in this question of what does it mean to experience trauma that stays in the body, and then what does that mean for our life? That really came into focus for me when I was working in universities with students who were doing social justice work. So many of the people that I worked with came to that work that they were doing, that they were passionate about, changing the world for the better, out of traumas that they had experienced. They wanted to change systems of oppression because they had been harmed by them. And in many cases, were carrying that harm in ways that were, clear in certain instances and certain interactions, but that I did not know anything about, and I certainly didn't know how to address. That sort of dynamic of the ways in which past hurts can be alive inside of our present reality also came clear to me through, some of my personal experiences, working through, some things from my own experience that came forward and, caused me to have to do some of my own healing work. This question of why does it feel like, this thing that happened in the past is actually still happening now when it's not. I followed those inquiries into an organization that was very supportive for me in my own spiritual and healing journey, and one that I ultimately did teacher training with, the Embodied Wisdom Teacher Training Program. And inside of these spaces, I learned a lot more about the ways in which trauma can be carried in the body, and the techniques and sorts of experiences that can be facilitated that help to open up that space where that trauma lives and begin to clear it out. But I also saw the ways in which, if we're not fully prepared and we're not fully skilled with working through the wide range of things that can happen for us when trauma gets opened up, that there are experiences that can happen that we're not prepared for. There are ways in which we can actually cause more harm by opening up a person to facing their trauma when we're not prepared to walk them fully through that, or they're not prepared to work inside of the experiences that they're having. And so I witnessed both of those sides of it, the ways in which trauma can absolutely be profoundly and positively cleared and shifted, and in some cases healed through embodiment-based work, spiritual practice, meditative work, working with the body, with the mind, with the energy, in collaboration with each other to shift the realities happening inside of our body. But I also saw the moments when we're not prepared to deal with what is coming through. Because really, what I'm coming to understand, and we're living in a time scientifically that's really quite exciting. There's so much greater understanding and learning that has happened around the physiology of trauma, the physiology of the brain, the connection between the mind, the body, the emotions, the spirit, the way that can now be measured and witnessed scientifically in ways that in the past we've only been able to witness within our own experience and observations. So we know now that when we talk about trauma, when we talk about embodied trauma or post-traumatic stress, what we're talking about is a series of physiological responses, a cascade of physiological responses that happen naturally inside the body. In other words, the fight or flight response, the cascade of hormonal releases and intuitive responses that our body has when we are afraid or we're in danger. And that in times of great distress and in times with certain conditions present, that natural cascade of physiological responses can get hijacked. It can get stuck in a repetitive cycle rather than fully digesting that frightening experience. Once the experience is over, that sensation of fear and of danger stays embedded in the body. And that cascade of hormonal responses continues to cycle through our system over and over again, long past the end of the danger. There's a lot of different reasons that this can happen, many different circumstances within which this embedded trauma can happen, far more than we're going to go into in this conversation. But what's important for our conversation here is the idea that what we're dealing with is a deeply embedded cycle that gets stuck. It gets stuck inside of the body and it gets set on repeat so that it gets triggered in moments that where there isn't the danger present anymore. And that this can cause a whole wealth of incredibly difficult consequences for our health, for our emotional state, our mental state, for our relationships, our behaviors, for our ability to imagine a better future for ourselves and take actions in service of that future. There's just such a wide range of ways in which trauma can impact us. And we're starting to learn more. As we learn more about how it actually functions in our nervous system, we're learning more about what it actually takes to reset those patterns, to cause that cascade of responses to calm down and come back into its natural alignment inside of our system so that our nervous system can go back into a natural rhythm of rest, of relaxation, of being calm and in a down-regulated space rather than being in a heightened state all the time. Oftentimes, what that looks like is clearing away the things that are stuck, that are in the way. That can include memories, physical sensations, responses, intuitive responses that our bodies have. And meditative, spiritual practices, physiological practices can have a profound impact on that process. In fact, we know now, or at least it's strongly suspected, that when we're dealing with embedded trauma that's embedded and stuck in the body, talk therapy alone really can't undo it from inside of our body. We can understand quite a bit more about what happened to us. We can understand quite a bit more about the sorts of responses that we're having. But to truly recondition our nervous system to go back into a natural cycle of rest and digest requires an embodied practice, not just a cognitive practice of talk therapy. And there is a wide range of practices, both inside of the realm of therapy, psychotherapy, and psychology, and inside the realm of wellness, that dramatically impacts positively this experience. It's understood more and more that bringing in embodiment-based techniques, potentially spiritual techniques, into a therapeutic setting is profound and powerful way to supplement or to even centralize, to focus on these practices in trauma healing work. And so that's where Reiki steps into this conversation, because Reiki is an embodiment-based spiritual practice that really, focuses on aligning the body, the heart, the mind, the breath, the energy in ways that allow our system to regulate in natural and healthy and whole manner. For many people, it's also explicitly a healing practice. And I think this is where the automatic response that, yes, Reiki can heal trauma comes from. Reiki is often perceived as a powerful energy-based healing practice, and in many ways it is. But it's also a spiritual meditative practice. And so I want to talk about this question from a couple of different angles when it comes to Reiki specifically. So what do I mean by that? Firstly, I want to say that my perspective will come from practicing and teaching the system of Reiki, specifically from its Japanese origins. And from those origins, the system consists of 5 elements. The hands-on healing practice that most people think of when they think of the system of Reiki is just one of those 5 elements. And so when it comes to working with trauma and the question of can Reiki heal trauma, I want to distinguish self-practice, which has everything to do with the other 4 elements of the system of practice, in addition to the hands-on healing. And then also the experience of being a client of a Reiki practitioner going to hands-on healing sessions. These are actually 2 different experiences that, require slightly different consideration when we think about this question of can Reiki heal trauma. So beginning with self-practice, because Reiki, first and foremost, from its original perspective, is a self-practice. It is an enlightenment practice. It's a distillation of esoteric Japanese Buddhist and Shinto practices that were long existing before Mikao Usui distilled them down into this simple, accessible system of practice consisting of 5 elements. It is a system designed to clear away all of the distraction and detritus and gunk and nonsense that we build up over time that cover over and distract from our true and original nature. It's a system of practice that's designed to gently clear away this detritus and slowly over time, or sometimes rapidly, depending on our practice and the circumstances, lay bare the bright light of our true self. Lay bare that true and original self that is spacious, that is grounded, that is compassionately connected to itself and to all other life, and that is resilient and whole and healed. And there's many practices inside of the system that help us to do that. From that perspective, if we look at the description that I just gave of a system of practice that clears away, the things that are in the way from us being our true and full and whole self, and then we look at the description that I just gave of trauma, of things covering over our natural cycles that cause these cycles to get stuck in this reactionary fight or flight space, we can see some interesting potential overlapping in a way that could be very beneficial, because the system of Reiki invites and really requires us to bring our attention back to our body, to focus in our center, and to use practices that, again, clear away everything that's in the way of our truest, brightest, most healed and whole self. That includes these traumatic responses. That includes the places that feel stuck, that feel like they're caught in a continuous loop of traumatic response. And so from that perspective, yes, practicing the system of Reiki, the meditations, the visualizations, the breath work, the physical touch practices that are central to the practice, absolutely can be a powerful aspect of a process of healing from trauma. Now, notice I said an aspect of, because one of the things that's really important to acknowledge is that just in the way that a system like Reiki can bring our attention to the places that need to be healed, and to help us to do that, by bringing our attention to those hurt places, it can also reignite the hurt and the trauma. This has been well studied within the realm of mindfulness meditation. The work of David Treleaven is really powerful and effective and very informative around this conversation. He looked at data and as well as his own experiences as both a therapist and as a mindfulness meditation practitioner, of instances where bringing the attention into the body, as you do in mindfulness meditation and as you do in Reiki, can have a profoundly triggering effect on somebody experiencing trauma. One of the reasons for that is that one of the ways that we defend against harm psychologically is through the process of dissociation. If you can imagine an experience where we're trapped in a cycle of harm. So perhaps this is an abusive relationship or a childhood experience where there's harm being done to us, physical, psychological, emotional harm. And we can't physically get away from it. We can't run away from it. We can't separate ourselves from it, whether this is a short-term situation or a long-term situation. Our system has to find a way to cope with that. And one of the amazing, brilliant, just miraculous strategies that our system has developed over time to deal with a situation like this, where there's no escape, there's no physical escape available to us, is to create a mental escape, an emotional escape, where we can leave the situation mentally and emotionally if we can't leave it physically. And that can be, extreme versions of dissociation. It can be more day-to-day distraction, a tendency to be spaced out, a tendency to just not be paying a whole lot of attention to what's going on in our body. This can happen as in a response to, it doesn't have to be catastrophically traumatic experiences, but even just kind of day-to-day, pains and challenges where we become habitual to space out and to leave our body. This is something that I experienced when I began kind of working through my own experience of unwinding trauma from my own system. I became aware that I had a tendency to dissociate. And often that would happen in times when something kind of intense or serious was happening and I needed to make decisions. I would kind of check out from the situation mentally and emotionally and be really really struggled to kind of stay present enough to make decisions in those moments. That was something that I had to work through and that I've made a lot of progress on. But bringing it back to the conversation at hand, when we have developed a strategy of dissociation or even just checking out or spacing out from our body because of pain or, some sort of challenge that we're having, if we're asked to now bring our attention to the body, to our present physical experience, and we have not been well prepared for that, or we're not being facilitated by somebody who understands these dynamics, it can be an incredibly difficult experience. I was working with a student recently who experiences chronic illness and chronic pain. And dissociation from the body is one of the strategies that they have developed to just live with this situation. Again, an amazing, miraculous strategy to be able to deal with something that you can't escape from physically and to be able to continue carrying on and functioning in life. But when asked to bring their attention into the body during our Reiki practice, this was very challenging because all of a sudden they had to really pay attention to things going on inside their body that they had habitually dissociated from. And so this was something that we are being very careful, very, putting a lot of space around. We're really taking our time to investigate what are the strategies that can help ease into that in a way that's accessible, rather than jumping into the deep end all at once in a way that's too much, that can overload the system. And so, yes, practicing the system of Reiki can be a really powerful way of addressing trauma. But we want to be sure that if there truly is traumatic responses possibly happening, that we also have support from trauma professionals. A Reiki practitioner, unless we have been trained as a trauma professional, is not a trauma professional, right? And there are things that need to be understood about the physiological and emotional responses to trauma that we might have some understanding on based on our own studies, our own experiences, our own intuitive knowing, but that we don't necessarily have all of the strategies to deal with in real time. And so we want to acknowledge that. And if we're working with somebody that, or we are somebody who is actively working through trauma, is really, in that question of, can Reiki help me with this, healing this trauma? It's very likely that other support will also be necessary, and that Reiki can be part of a really powerful plan to address the trauma, but it isn't necessarily the whole story. And if we're, the more acute the case is, the more that is true. That we want to be sure that the person has enough of a container of support around them and enough, people who understand what they're going through and how their particular responses work, that they can ease through this process in a way that is manageable for them, as opposed to being dropped into the deep end all at once. Whether that's through self-practice or through working with a practitioner. So that kind of brings us to the other side of the equation, right? If we're going to a practitioner and we want to have a series of Reiki sessions that, are in the hands-on healing category, and we're wondering, can this help us to resolve some trauma issues or to heal trauma? I would say, again, the question is, it depends. That we want to be mindful of all of the things that I just mentioned, that having an experience with a practitioner of surrendering, of releasing into a relaxing situation, of gentle, consensual, non-sexual touch can be very healing. It can be a really powerful, opportunity for the system to relax, for the nervous system to go into that restful space, and to, receive some, powerful healing experience. Any piece of that can potentially have healing properties for a person. Just trusting somebody with that restful space, being in that relaxing space, the energy work itself, all of these things can contribute to a healing experience. And all of those things could also contribute to a very triggering experience if a number of things. I actually teach a class in cultivating a trauma-informed Reiki practice for Reiki practitioners for this reason, because there are many things that we as practitioners can do to reduce the possibility of reigniting that trauma for that person, kind of having the opposite effect of what we're going for. And it really is all about building a space of safety, of trust, and many opportunities for that person to give consent and have control over the experience that they're having. Just if we look at the simple subject of touch in and of itself, physical touch is a profoundly healing aspect of your typical Reiki session when our system can relax into it and trust it. If our system has been conditioned to fear physical touch from another person and to react as if it is a dangerous situation, then even if we want to have the experience of healing touch with a Reiki practitioner, our system, our nervous system might respond as if this is a threat. There are things that we as Reiki practitioners can do to help set that up to be a situation for relaxation and release and receiving, as opposed to one that is triggering. Really, the place to begin is always asking permission before touching a person, even if there is an implicit understanding that this Reiki session will involve physical touch. I always ask, let me rephrase, I endeavor to always ask. I am human. I don't do this perfectly. There are certainly times when I forget, or I've been working with someone for so long that I go, it's fine. I know they're okay with touch. So I am not perfect in this by any means, but I endeavor, it is my intention and it is my practice to always ask for consent before touching a person. The act of giving consent can help to downregulate that traumatic response, right? Being asked and then giving consent, giving permission before being touched is in and of itself a healing practice. Can be, depending on our situation. I'll say also that just as in the example of self-practice, that we might need to be working with somebody who's in the realm of trauma professional, similarly, if we are going to a Reiki practitioner, or we are a Reiki practitioner receiving clients who are working with trauma, and we ourselves are not trauma therapists, it is a very good idea if that person also has support by somebody who works in the realm of trauma. And that's a question that I endeavor to ask people if this topic comes up. I don't ask this of everybody because I'm not going to pry into why a person is coming beyond what they want to tell me. So I put protocols, practices, systems in place within my practice to, again, create the best possible conditions for a person to be well supported, whether or not they are experiencing trauma. Just kind of going on the assumption that everybody it benefits from feeling safe, from feeling trust, from giving consent and feeling like they're in control of their experience. But if a person specifically asks, can Reiki help with my trauma, or discloses, I'm working through a traumatic experience, then we'll have a conversation about what other support they have in their life so that I know whether or not this, this space of my Reiki studio, this container of this session, is the only place that this person is working through these experiences, or if there is a larger container that is holding them. And there's been times when I have, really had to set a boundary with a client and say, just based on what you're sharing, what I'm observing, I really feel like before we enter into Reiki sessions, which can potentially be very soothing and healing, but also can potentially be triggering, I want to be sure that you have a wider network of support. And so at that point, I give them recommendations on how they might do that. And, there are ways I can support people alongside that process outside of Reiki sessions. So these are all pieces of what it means to cultivate a trauma-informed Reiki practice, where we're really considering the space that we're holding and how we can set people up for the greatest success, and be honest about our own abilities and limitations when it comes to something as complex as healing trauma. I want to say and acknowledge that there is certainly also the experience of miraculous healing in a particular moment. I don't want to discount that. I have known people who have experienced inside of a practice like Reiki truly what they experienced as a miraculous healing, where something that had been entracted in them for a long time released and felt like it was gone, and it was healed, and it was out of their life in that moment. And that is powerful and absolutely happens. But I will say it is not the norm. The norm is that healing is a journey. It's a process, and it's cyclical. It spirals. We spiral through the process of healing. We do a little bit of work, a little bit of clearing, a little bit of laying bare more of ourself, and then we spiral back around to that hurt place. We meet it from a different angle. We meet it as a different person with greater resources, hopefully. And then we spiral back around again. And every time we meet that hurt place, if we've been doing our work, if we've been diligent, if we've been getting good support and giving ourselves good, compassionate space, then we meet that hurt from a different angle, from a different place as a different person. And slowly over time, that hurt shifts and changes and releases, and we experience healing. More often than not, this is a journey. It's not a miraculous moment. And so if we answer the question, can Reiki heal trauma, with a simple yes or a simple no, then we're really missing the layers of subtlety that are necessary in this conversation. And I want us to be able to have those conversations to a deeper level. I want us to be able to be honest and in good integrity about what we can and cannot, expect of ourselves as practitioners and as people going through our own healing journeys. These things require a lot of space, a lot of compassion, a lot of patience. And we owe ourselves all of those things and more if we're going to take on a healing journey as the experiencer of that journey, as a space holder for others on that journey. However it is that we meet this, we really want to honor it with patience, with compassion, and with spaciousness, and with good, proven technique for how to do this work well, because it matters that we do it well. And I know that anybody who's gotten this far in this video believes that and wants to do this work well for themselves and for others. So that's what's on my mind. That's just what came through. And when I once again ran into this question the other day of can Reiki heal trauma, it just really felt like, I want to speak on this. I want to just share some thoughts from the perspective, not of a trauma professional, but as one who has walked this question for a very long time. I've been living into this question for a very long time, both, what does it mean to heal trauma generally, and what does it mean to incorporate Reiki into that process and that practice? Something I'm very passionate about, which is why I share this work with other Reiki practitioners through the Cultivating a Trauma-Informed Reiki Practice class that I teach. I do have a segment of that class coming up in March of 2023. So if you are listening to this video before March 20, this is embarrassing. I don't remember the exact date, so I'm not going to say it. Sometime in March, I'm going to put that link down below to that class, and also the link just to the general information about this work so that you can learn a little bit more if you are interested. Friends, I'd love to hear your own experiences with this from any angle, any side of this equation. Just what has come through for you in your experiences? What other questions do you have about this topic? And what do you want to see in the landscape of Reiki, in the landscape of trauma healing? What do you want to see happen so that we can all do this work stronger, with more integrity, with more effectiveness? Okay, that's all I got for you today. Thanks so much for listening. As you walk this journey on any point of any of these topics, may you be deeply provisioned for it. Thanks so much for watching. Till next time, I love you. Goodbye.